BibleWorm is on hiatus for the summer. We'll be back with new narrative lectionary episodes beginning August 31st for regular listeners and August 24th for subscribers. In the meantime, we hope you'll enjoy this episode from our Creation Care series, which first aired in summer 2024.
BibleWorm, reading the Bible with BibleWorm.
Welcome to BibleWorm, getting to the core of the biblical text. I'm Dr. Amy Robertson, Director of Lifelong Learning and Music at Congregation Or Hadash in Sandy Springs, Georgia.
And I'm Dr. Robert Williamson, Professor of Religious Studies at Hendrix College and Theologian in Residence of Canvas Community in Little Rock, Arkansas. We're here every week to discuss the biblical text, both as biblical scholars and as people of faith, one Jewish and one Christian.
This week we continue our special series on creation care with Psalm 65 and special attention to the water. This psalm brings together scenes of prayer and silence, of humans and nature, and of a God who is the orientation point for all of it. It made us wonder, what if we could see ourselves, just for a moment, as almost like a sibling to the water? Both of us oriented toward God, both of us in relationship to God, and both calmed by God when we inevitably become a source of chaos. And it made us wonder if we could quiet ourselves enough to offer silence as praise, if we could quiet our minds and the voices of scarcity and acquisitiveness around us, what else in creation could be heard? What would it say to us and to our Maker? Thanks for being with us. Hey, Bobby, how are you?
Hey, Amy, I am good. You know, we always make the distinction, I don't know if we've talked about this before, between Dr. Williamson and Summer Bobby. And
yes.
Today, I am Summer Bobby mode.
I know. He's wearing a t-shirt, folks.
I am. I'm still in my office at school, so if I were truly Summer Bobby, I'd either
be at the beach.
Yeah, well, I'd probably be in my office at home. But yeah, we should do a podcast where we're like each hanging out at the beach,
drinking a margarita,
drinking umbrella drinks. Or we could be in the same place and do that.
We could.
Mm-hmm. We should do family vacations where your family and my family go on vacation together.
Go to the beach and we record podcasts while drinking margaritas.
Yeah, let's do it.
Anyway, I am glad to be here with Summer Bobby. And Summer Amy, too. It's when the school year's out, man.
Yeah.
The world is my oyster.
Yeah.
Do whatever I want, and I choose to do this.
We choose to do the Bible worms. There is a part of the summer also where we don't do Bible worms, but I'm glad that there's a part where we do because it's nice to read texts that we have chosen, spend more time in the Hebrew scriptures,
yes.
Spend more time making small talk.
Bobby, it is our third episode, I think, in our summer series on creation care. So we read the sort of traditional creation text, one of them from Genesis, and then we read Job chapter 38. And this week we are reading Psalm 65.
It's true.
We've never talked about Psalm 65 before, and I am excited to do it.
I'm excited to do it too. When I was digging around about this psalm, I discovered that this psalm is often read at Thanksgiving services in the United States when we celebrate whatever we celebrate on Thanksgiving. And so it was just interesting that this is, I had not made that connection.
Yeah, I could kind of see it. Like there's a real image of bounty.
Yes. The bountifulness of creation.
Fill your cornucopia.
Yeah. Which may actually well be how this psalm was originally used in ancient Israel as a harvest or beginning of the planting season. I'm so not a farmer that those two things kind of seem the same to me. And I don't know when you would sing this song. I mean, I know they're different, but I'm like, I don't know when you...
Okay, Bobby.
When do you sing about water? I don't know. Probably like both of them maybe, but...
Yeah.
There is a case that this psalm was read in the planting season in, say, in October or something like that in Israel.
Mm-hmm. Yes. No, I saw some references to it maybe being sung during Sukkot.
Yep.
Yeah, our fall harvest festival.
Our theme, did we say? Our theme is water this week. We sort of
No,
we're
we did
following
not.
that spirit and truth sort of elements of creation that we are responsible for. And so they are on, last week was sky, this week is water. So this psalm, I mean, it has like, the Bible, of course, does not neatly fall into these sort of different units.
Yes,
But
it cares not about our tags.
it does
However,
Yes. But this psalm does have some references to water in various ways. So I just want to keep that out in front of us.
yeah.
We can talk
Yeah.
about anything we want, but the role of water
Yes.
is front and center.
Especially water. Good. Well, we have offered a little bit of background to the series, a little bit of background to Psalm 65. Is there anything else you want to just sort of put on the table before we start reading?
I don't think so. Psalms is always so hard to give background to, for at least for me, because it's such a diverse book and comes from all sorts of different
Yes.
periods of time. And people used to think a lot about the Zitzimleben of the Psalms, like when was this used and was it a congregational gathering at the temple or what was it? But to me, I've never really found a whole lot of energy in that conversation.
Oh, I like the way you put that. I just, I'm reading through Psalms with my weekly Torah study group right now, and I just had this, I guess, sort of debate with someone in the class who wanted very much to talk about possible ancient Near Eastern settings and backgrounds for a particular psalm. And I don't oppose any of that. But what really sort of has energy in it and kind of lights me up is often the way that the Psalms can speak to us now in
Yes.
our own context. And because they're not so historically located like some of the other narrative texts that we've looked at or prophetic texts, I feel a lot of license to do that.
Me too.
So-
Me too. So let's do that.
Let's do that. That'd be fun. Okay, so we are reading Psalm 65, and I am reading from the NJPS. Here we go.
Let's do it.
For the leader, a psalm of David, a song. Praise befits you in Zion, O God. Vows are paid to you. All mankind comes to you, you who hear prayer. When all manner of sins overwhelm me, it is you who forgive our iniquities. Happy is the man you choose and bring near to dwell in your courts. May we be sated with the blessings of your house, your holy temple. Okay, so I'm going to stop us there for now. Bobby, this psalm starts us off, it kind of, I was going to say locates us, but I guess locates God in Zion.
Yes.
And I'm wondering how the mention of Zion from the get-go sort of, I don't know, does it like set your mind in some way, like anchor you in a particular mindset?
It does, yeah. Because, we've been for the last couple of weeks sort of thinking about God as like God on the loose in the world. And like Genesis 1, God is sort of, almost outside of creation and bringing things into being. Job 38 has that sense of like God, like the cosmos is big and complicated and God is out there with the places where the darkness is and in the deeps and laying the foundations. This to me, the mention of Zion, and then again in verse 4, the mention of the goodness of your house, the holiness of your temple in the Common English Bible. This is much more located for me in the setting of Jerusalem, on the Temple Mount, Zion, as it is called, and in the worship center. So God is still big and God is still everywhere, but God is specially located in that worship space. So it shifts God is accessible somehow in this text, in that place of worship. I think that's what it does for me. What does it do for you?
Yeah, no, I think that's the way you articulated that is really helpful in grounding. Like there is, as we'll see as the psalm goes on, we do get to a broader sensibility of God's presence in all of creation, but it really starts us in a very particular place. And even almost at I don't know if I would say a particular moment, but like vows are paid to you. All mankind, which is kol basar, all flesh, comes to you.
Yes.
It feels both more sort of accessible, as you said. Like, there's a special place you can go to be close to God, and this is where it is, and you can go. And it also feels, it like triggers this sort of like ritual mind in me. Like, what does the ritual world have to say about this? Are they bringing sacrifices? Like, are they following rules?
Right.
Like, is there a ceremony? It's not just sort of this freewheeling, God is everywhere kind of thing.
Yeah, that's interesting because there's not really mention of sacrifices here, although we'll get some notion of some sort of atonement or something in a little bit. But it does make sense that maybe you would think about the ritual aspects of it, even though they're not foregrounded in the text anywhere that I can see. I like that idea.
I guess that's how I'm thinking about vows. Vows are paid to you. Is that maybe if it hadn't mentioned God being in Zion, I wouldn't be thinking of it so concretely. But
so interesting as you as a sort of priestly, like your interests, priestly, Leviticus, like that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And me as like a Protestant Christian who doesn't know how to make any sense of all that. We read it differently. I just sort of think of vows as like internal commitments that have been made. But no, you're right. There very much is that external sense of vow that could be read here, maybe should be read here.
But there's also this you who hear prayer, which is one of my favorite, Shomea Tefillah, the one who hears prayer, is one of my favorite names for God. And that to me feels, I don't know, more about, I feel more of a personal connection to that. Like it's interesting to me that this whole part, like we're going to talk about the water, we're going to talk about creation, and we are, but like at this moment, we really are in a different system.
That's exactly right. I love that. I never really paid attention to that name for God, but I like that, the one who hears prayer. And so that sort of sets this context of, like, it's not just Godding around, which we've seen in kind of the earlier text, but here's a sense that God is responsive. People are streaming to the temple. God is listening. God is paying attention. It's become, human beings have been, last week especially, human beings were largely irrelevant to like the whole point was like Job doesn't know what he's talking about.
Yes.
Here you've got this image, as you're saying, of God sort of leaning in and paying attention to what humans say. I like that a lot.
And then does the feeling of this shift or expand in some way for you when we start talking about when all manner of sins overwhelm me?
Amy, so I've been working on a interpretation of the psalm that I'm not sure what you're gonna think of it, but it comes into focus right here. But I actually need to go back to the very beginning of what is verse 2, at least in my translation. Was your translation something like praise is owed to you or due to you or something like that?
Yeah, it says praise befits you.
Befits you. So the Hebrew there is demiyah tehillah. And demiyah is, there's different ways of understanding it, but one way of understanding it as silence.
That's right.
And so the CEB translates even silence is praise. And so I've been like lingering with that image. The versions don't follow that. The Septuagint doesn't follow that. I sort of thought the JPS might, because the JPS often is sort of sticking a little closer to the MT, the Masoretic text. But that image of silence is praise. And the CEB says even silence is praise, but the even is actually not in the Hebrew. It just says to you, silence is praise. I just think that is profound. Like, you talk too much, you never shut up. Like that kind of idea, like just be quiet. And God receives that as praise. The reason I bring that in on the question that you were asking me about when wrongdoings become too much for me is because the Hebrew there is divrei avanot, which can be understood as matters or deeds of wickedness, but divrei can also just mean words.
Yes.
So one could read that Hebrew as when words of iniquity become too strong for me. And so then I've got this image of like, what God really receives as praise is silence. And then the problem that the psalmist is having is that there's all these words in their ear, and like they're in their wicked words, and they just like, they can't resist them, and so they give in. And so then it says God forgives our transgressions. And so I've been working on this idea that maybe one way of understanding what's happening here is being in silence before God is the ideal, and that there's so much chatter in the world that we forget to be in silence before God, and we lose our way, and we start listening to other voices and other words, other ideas, and we end up doing things that we would not do if our orientation was to be in silence before God. And so then when we get overwhelmed, God is forgiving of us. So I'm like, that's a very different than the way the words are on the page in English. And so I don't know if I'm leading us astray or not.
Gorgeous. No, but it's gorgeous. I love it. And I love that, silence, or I feel like there's a sense of like silence and sort of like a stillness that's waiting. Like, it's not just like,
right.
It's not just you're quiet and it's like there's an anticipation or an attentiveness to the silence.
Yes.
I love that, Bobby. I'm going to hold on to that and see how that plays as we go on further here.
You were talking about the shift there in whatever verse that is.
Yeah, for me it's 4, but yeah, this is one of the Psalms where the versification's a little different. We're just going to have to handle it.
You were talking about the shift to wrongdoings, and so I was curious, when you were reading, what did you do with that shift?
I guess what I started to feel in that shift, again, I make reference to the Hebrew, but I was reading it in the English, really. So the way it reads in the English is sort of like, you move from praise, which is oriented towards God, but I feel like the acknowledgement that sins overwhelm you and you need forgiveness, it really sort of emphasized for me like our dependence on God's grace, I guess.
Yeah.
And our ultimate dependence, which I feel like is all over this psalm in different ways, but it really kind of fronts it here. It's not just that we should praise you, it's that we will be overwhelmed without you.
I love that, because then the sense of it is that this is going to happen. We are going to be overwhelmed, and God's orientation,
and then God is going to forgive us.
Is about forgiveness.
Yeah.
That's beautiful too.
And then we have this hope, may we be sated with the blessings of your house.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think this means?
I'm so glad you read that it's a cohortative in Hebrew. May we be filled, or may we be satisfied. The Common English Bible has we are filled. And I feel like that loses something, because to me, I think it's coming back to the way I was reading those earlier verses. But this idea of satisfaction or feeling full. And my thoughts about the world that we live in, late capitalism, America, or however you want to talk about it, is that our orientation to the world is that we're never satisfied. There's a sense in which we always want more. The economy has to grow. We have to move beyond what we are now and be something more in the future. And so when you read that in the cohortative, may we be satisfied by the goodness of your house, to me, that just means something like how good it is that we can be in the presence of God, and may that be enough for us. May we just receive that for what it is, and be full and happy in God's presence. And that's the satisfaction. And so then we lose all of that. And for me, it relates back to what are these words of iniquity that we were talking about earlier? And one way of reading that is those words of iniquity are saying you are never full, you're never satisfied, you are not enough. You've got to be more than you are. And so the prayer then becomes, may this be enough for us to be in silence in God's presence in God's house.
Yeah.
That's sort of how I've been reading it.
I love that. And I just love the way that whole paragraph sort of fits together in that way with the piece you added about, really, instead of praise, we should think of this as sort of a a quiet waiting or a silent, anticipation of something. Like there, I just feel some like mutuality in this. And if we can orient ourselves towards God just in this sort of like open-hearted, quiet way, there is the possibility that that's all that we need.
Yes. That's the way I'm reading it.
I love that. Now, of course, I feel like I would be remiss if I did not point out that we also could read this as if we are in right relationship with God, there will be rain for the rainy season, or, that we will be sated by the sacrificial meals because we have offered what we need to offer to God, and now we get to eat the rest of it. Like there are more concrete ways to read it.
Yes.
None of which I find as moving.
Yes.
Right now.
Yes. The other thing that's...
Go ahead.
Oh, I just said the other thing that's interesting to me there is in verse 4 in my translation is the how happy is the one you bring close.
Yes.
The one you bring near who will dwell in your temple. And so it's not the ones that are like smart enough or righteous enough or faithful enough to come to you. It's the sense in which God is drawing the people toward Zion. And those people are so fortunate, which I mean, maybe is just a slight shade of meaning because it's still people that are in the temple, that are in right relationship, but it's not because they were so great that they initiated. It's that God was so great that God chose to bring them near.
Yeah.
That's near and dear to my Presbyterian heart, in which there are the elect whom God brings near. So the little Presbyterian in me loves this particular verse.
No, I do. I love that. And I mean, at least in my own sort of spiritual life, I do feel genuinely so grateful when I am able to come really into that state of sort of open, wholehearted presence and quiet. It's not a given that I will be able to do that on any given day. Not because I don't wish I could, but because the world is really noisy and things compete for my attention. And I just, and so it really does feel like a gift and something that I can't just decide to do.
Yeah.
That I need help.
Yeah. Which brings us right back to that verse 4, when words of iniquity become too much for me, you forgive me and draw me close. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is John Weicker, and I am the Associate Pastor for Youth and Their Families at First Presbyterian Church of Durham, North Carolina. I am a BibleWorm supporter at the BibleWorm supporter level, $48 per year. And I do that not because we're on the narrative lectionary or even because I preach that often, although when I do preach and the texts line up, I certainly use the podcast. I actually use BibleWorm as my own personal devotion for the week. I'm someone who misses the deep theology and close reading of texts that I got to do a lot of in seminary. And in Bobby and Amy's work, I found that again. And so I listen on Monday mornings on my way over to church and then Monday afternoons on the way back as a way to prepare for the week, to do ministry, and to love Jesus and serve. I hope you'll join me in becoming a BibleWorm supporter too. And now back to this week's episode.
So I'm picking up at what is verse 6 in the NGPS translation, but I think maybe it's 5.
It's 5 in the Common English and NRSV.
Okay. Answer us with victory through awesome deeds, O God, our deliverer, in whom all the ends of the earth and the distant seas put their trust, who by his power fixed the mountains firmly, who is girded with might, who stills the raging seas, the raging waves, the tumultuous peoples. Those who live at the ends of the earth are awed by your signs. You make the lands of sunrise and sunset shout for joy. I love, Bobby, how we just had this whole conversation about how it's such a beautiful and fulfilling thing to be oriented towards God and aware of our dependence on God. And then it moves on to this, yes, God, our deliverer. Okay, great. In whom the ends of the earth and the distant seas put their trust.
Mm-hmm.
What what do you think that means? Or how does it orient you or reorient you?
I think the way that this is commonly read is that those phrases about the edges of the earth and the distant seas is often understood as talking about like people who are all over the world. But the image itself and this sort of like creation series that we're working on is more suggestive of it is the farmost reaches of the land and even the very waters who are putting their trust in God. Like not the people that are there, but those natural entities. And I really love that idea that the natural order is trusting in God, like in the same way that we talked about humans previously needing to trust in God. And here we see even the most kind of distant regions are also doing that.
Yeah.
The mountains are built up by God's strength. Like the natural order has its strength and its trust, and it's like it is also being made happy in God's presence in some way. What did you do with that image?
I think I'm just really appreciating the way that this next section of text, like we've established that we are dependent on and oriented towards God. And then I feel like a couple of times over, these next few lines say a similar thing about the natural world. And then, in what is my verse 8, is talking about God who stills the raging seas, the raging waves, and tumultuous peoples.
Yes.
Like it's like really putting us in parallel with the natural world as all being oriented towards God. Like this is not we are oriented towards the natural world or the natural world is oriented towards us.
Yes.
Like we're all looking the same way.
Yeah, I love that. That image of the waves there, the tumultuous seas. I mean, I think you can read that as the sea sometimes gets wavy or whatever. Like sometimes there are storms at sea that need to be calmed. And I mean, just to think about like water in general, and if that's our theme today too, thinking about water can be a beautiful and wonderful and life-giving thing. Water can also be a very out of control and tumultuous and dangerous thing. And so, as you well know, in the ancient Near East, the line 1 on the resume of a god was the capacity to control water, both to keep it from being destructive and then also to meter it out in life-giving ways. Yeah. And so one can read this sort of the power, like you calm the roaring seas, as a little bit of the God has the capacity to pacify the chaos monsters, right? The monstrous waters of chaos that threaten to undo the world. And we talked about that in Genesis 1. God can sort of sing them a lullaby or coochie coochie coo them or whatever, and they calm down. So I like that image a lot. So both that the seas are dependent on God, but also the seas have the capacity, either literally or metaphorically, to get out of control, and God can calm them.
Yeah, that, even some of the most beautiful imagery about water, I think in the whole Hebrew Bible, like that of justice streaming down waters, which can sound so peaceful. Yeah. And also, I think lifts up the enormity of the power of water. Yeah. Like if water is streaming down, it can wipe out everything else in its path. Yeah. It takes over. Like water, Baruch Hashem, have not lived through a great flood or, a mudslide or those kinds of environmental effects of water. But the power of it is enormous. And yet, as we pointed out in Genesis 1, and we can point out over and over again, God's job as creator was not to vanquish water and make it go away. Like, not to dissolve it and say the power of water is gone, because we need water.
Yes.
So to be able to moderate it and sort of keep it within boundaries that work for the system. Mm-hmm.
It's so interesting to me too in that verse 7 in the CEB. So the verb comes right at the beginning, you calm.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's those three objects, the calm, the roaring sea, the roaring waves, the noise of the peoples.
Mm-hmm.
The noun that's with the peoples is hamon, which can be the sound or the murmur or the roar. And so it like tumult kind of gets there, but it's actually an audible thing, which to me is important in light of what I was saying earlier, is that sometimes people get really loud and noisy. And so we start to, the way in which we get out of control is that we get loud and we start to say stuff. And then that comes back to those words of wickedness, and that comes back to the silence that God receives as praise. And so if you read it that way, then God here is sort of calming down the seas, like making sure the waves are at an appropriate level, and then also like shushing the people down just a little bit, and like keeping us calm and quiet.
I love that, Bobby, and it has me wondering, like, how far do you go in your head with this sort of comparison between the water and the people, and sort of what they need from God?
Yeah.
And I don't know what kind of power they have, and I don't know. I feel like you could take that in a lot of directions.
Yes. I think the way that I'm reading it right now is that, in the world of the Hebrew Bible, the sea, as I was saying, or as we have been saying, is often viewed as a source of chaos. And here the people are kind of being reminded that we too are a source of chaos.
Yeah.
And so instead of simply saying like God needs to calm the seas down, there's a recognition here that God also needs to calm us down. We likewise have the capacity to do good in the world, but also the capacity to be destructive. And so we're like the sea in that way. I think there's other things one could do with that image too.
That is such an interesting connection to the first stanza we looked at.
I realize I'm taking this psalm that's about water, and ironically, I just talked over you while you were talking about being quiet.
No, it's okay.
This psalm that's mostly about water, I have turned it into a psalm about human beings, and so I just want to acknowledge that I've recentered ourselves.
I think the progression of this psalm, it grounds us in ourselves first.
That is true.
And then it takes us into ourselves in water that it kind of puts in parallel.
Oh, yeah.
And then it's going to move us more
in
the watery direction.
Yeah.
So I think you're
lovely.
on solid ground.
All right. It also means I'm doing okay. I appreciate that.
You're doing okay. I think you're doing okay.
Yeah.
So we've been talking about all this quiet, and then we have some shouting for joy.
Yes.
I just wonder how does that fit in with all of this?
I don't know that I've really paid that much attention to that. The gateways of morning and evening. Your translation was different. It was the places
the lands of sunrise and sunset.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I'd like the sort of, I think it looks more like the gateways of morning and evening in the Hebrew.
If we read it that way, the gateways of morning and evening sing for joy. I don't know. I don't quite know what to do with it right now, but I think it's a lovely image.
That particular way of saying it is making me think of, instead of like a place, it's making me think of more like the organizing forces of creation, sort of like that, there is this cycle of day and night, that there is something essential about the foundational aspects of creation that I don't know what to use about the shout for joy language in particular. I mean, it was making me think when I was first reading it about that language in Job that we had about like the stars were singing with joy, like the morning stars or something like that. But there seems like there's some almost like vibration that goes through creation when everything is as it should be. Everything is in its right place. and the waters aren't destroying everything.
Yeah. It's so interesting too that it's the creation that is, or like the sunrise and sunset that's appropriately loud here. That is so interesting.
It almost goes back to that same idea that you started with, that when we can quiet the things that need to be quieted, we can hear the things that we need to hear, but they're not loud things.
That's beautiful. Yeah. So the sunrise and the sunset are like, yay.
Yeah.
People are like, oh, rah, rah. You can't hear them. But if we're quiet, then, yeah.
Can you imagine what it's at this time of year, it's making me think of like the morning and evening bird song, which is not exactly what this is saying. It could have said birds. That's not what it's saying. Yeah. But just to be able to quiet ourselves enough to hear what are the sounds during those very quiet times of the day.
I love that. It's reminding me of a story. When I was in seminary for a year, I lived out in LA and I worked with kids who are at risk for gang involvement. So these were kids who grew up in downtown LA and they were just always under lights. And there was a power outage in LA and you could see the stars. And these kids didn't know what the stars were. They were like, what on earth is happening in the sky?
Wow.
Because the light of LA just drowned out the stars. And so that's sort of like the creation
thing.
Is rejoicing. Yes. It is shouting. Like, look at the sunset and the sunrise. Those things are amazing. But we don't hear them because there's so much human-created pollution of various kinds.
Yes. Yeah, I love that. Oh, we're such a noisy species, Bobby.
We are.
Okay, so far, do you see this psalm drawing out any particular relationship between us humans, and the natural world?
I don't know, Amy. I think so far the connection that I'm making is just about kind of what we were just saying about if the people and the noisy parts of chaotic creation can calm down, then we can recognize the like essence of creation or something like that. That God is present with all of us, or something like that. But the way you asked that question is not really a way that I have been thinking about it. What are you thinking about the relationship of humans and creation at this moment in this text?
I think I still see at this point in the text like a relationship between these parts of creation and God and humans and God, but it's almost like we're in parallel and we're both oriented towards God. And so it's, it reminds me of, when we read Genesis 1 and you pointed out that I think it was the animals have the imperative to be fruitful and multiply. Like they get a command directly from God that is not mediated by us. They have their own relationship to God. And humans show up, towards the end and are indeed given a particular charge. But we have to recognize there was something there first. Like this wasn't all set up for us.
Yes.
We're just supposed to help.
Yeah.
Help keep things moving.
Yeah.
That's what this is reminding me of so far.
So human beings and creation are kind of in parallel.
Yeah, they're our sibling.
I like that way of thinking about it. Yeah. I love that way of thinking about it.
Noisy and chaotic, as siblings always are.
Oh my goodness, yes.
Okay, is there anything else pressing on you from this section? Or shall I take us to the end?
I'm hoping we're going to bring humankind and creation together in the last section. Is that what
we'll see. I don't know.
Do?
Maybe we're going to be held in separate parts of the house.
Let's see what happens.
So I'm picking up in verse 10 in my translation. You take care of the earth and irrigate it. You enrich it greatly with the channel of God full of water. You provide grain for men, for so do you prepare it. Saturating its furrows, leveling its ridges, you soften it with showers. You bless its growth. You crown the year with your bounty. Fatness is distilled in your paths. The pasture lands distill it. The hills are girded with joy. The meadows are clothed with flocks, the valleys mantled with grain. They raise a shout, they break into song.
It struck me when you read verse 1, which is just a title in my translation. It says, for the music leader, a psalm of David, which is pretty common. And then it says a song. And I was like, that's so interesting that it specifies that it's a song. And then the psalm also ends on the word song, but now it's not a people song. It's a valleys that are shouting for joy in the meadowlands. So hey, congregation, here's a song. And then the song is actually about creation singing. That's so interesting.
Yeah, I love that. So, what's funny, Bobby, probably just because of the conversation we were coming off of about what is our relationship to creation here and in Genesis 1, when I first read, you take care of the earth and irrigate it, I was like, now you take care of the earth and irrigate it.
like an imperative. Y'all,
that is not,
no.
But that is not, this is the capital Y-U.
Yeah.
This is God.
Yeah. It's so interesting because I think human beings actually kind of disappeared in this last part of this text. You know what I mean?
Sort of. Yes, and there is, you prepare grain for men.
Oh, that is true. Yeah. What verse is that in?
In 10. Okay. Well, yeah, no, this says you provide their grain. It does not say for men.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's very different.
Yeah, no, that is different. And I mean, I think kind of what the way I was thinking about it was these verses at the end of the day, if you're a human being reading these verses, what you're thinking is when God meters rain into the world, it produces grain for us to eat. And so we're sort of grateful for all of this abundance because of its usefulness for us. But it is,
and we have that essential need. Like it's okay that we need to eat food. That is the design. Yeah. It's fine. But continue.
But the psalm itself is actually not like it is just about the abundance of creation and that one little like their food and who is the there in that sin or their grain and what and so maybe human beings are sort of implied there, but we're just like a pronominal suffix, we're like in this whole little section. And so there is both the sort of the bounty of the earth is beautiful in its bountifulness. And also it gives us food to eat, but it's not as sort of utilitarian as one might imagine.
Yeah. This is not like factory farming.
Right. Exactly.
Bobby, this image that in the text, the channel of water is full of God. That's my translation. That is a really different kind of image than the way that I thought about God's relationship to water in the first creation story, where it was sort of like, I don't know, this kind of like dangerous, chaotic force that God was putting boundaries around.
Right.
But a channel feels much more sort of organized and tranquil, and calling it the channel of God, it certainly does not go as far as to say that this comes from God, that the water comes from God, but I don't know how to describe it. It just has a very different feeling about it to me.
What it was reminding me of, I mean, I think it does go back to that Genesis 1 text, but it was also reminding me of the Job 38 text. In verse 25, who cut a channel for the downpours?
Yes.
And the Hebrew there is the same.
Yes.
And so there's a sense in which there is a channel of God, wherever it is, that mediates water into the world. And so this is that. And I think it's good. I guess. I think it's good that the channel is full because that's how the water, I don't know if this is like the windows of heaven, to go back to that Genesis 1 text where the rain comes, or if this is like, I don't quite know if it's God's irrigation ditch. Like, I don't quite know how to think about it.
Yeah.
I do think it's that sort of, here's the way God meters water into the world, and it is always full, meaning there is no, or not always full, but it is currently full, which means there is no threat of a drought.
Yeah, I also thought of that line in Job, and I think I felt like that was sort of a bridge because it was, this image of God cutting a channel for these tumultuous waters, like
Right.
torrents and thunderstorms. So like the idea that they're not just ripping through on their own.
Yes.
And now here again we have the channel, but it just seems more it seems like a more peaceful image. It's not stormy water.
Right.
It's water that's going to irrigate.
Right. The CEB gives God's stream full of water, which I think is that's a nice, it's just a little trickling brook kind of thing.
Yeah. I want to point out one other verb that stood out to me in the Hebrew, and I honestly don't know how significant it is or isn't, but when it says, you take care of the earth, it uses pakad, which is the same verb that is used when God sort of notices and remembers Sarah's barrenness.
Oh, yeah.
Like I take note of that.
Yeah.
And it's the same verb that's used like at the end of the census. It's sort of like you have to take note. Who are your people? Like who are you remembering? And again, I love all the different ways that this psalm just sort of sets up humans and aspects of nature as like God is attending to all of these things.
I love that so much. And so the Sarah who has not been able to produce, and the earth which is not able to produce, and then God visits both of them, and this creates this sort of abundance. In this psalm, the way that God does that, it's so clear here that the water properly administered is the source for the earth's abundance. And so it's God's stream is full, and so that is what drenches the ground. That is what softens the earth so we can till it. That is what brings forth the food. That is what brings fertility to the desert. There's just this real sense here that it all depends on the water that God provides to the earth. It's a starting point for everything else.
Yeah.
I think that is so true, and also easy to forget as human beings who I'm pretty disconnected from the sources of water. I just turn on my faucet and there it is.
Yeah, there it is.
Sometimes I get a bottle out of the fridge, or whatever. And so this idea of water as the precious resource from which all else comes is kind of distant from me, but this psalm is really pulling me back to that.
And it's really, I so appreciate that we went back and looked at the Hebrew to see that it doesn't expressly say you provide grain for men. It maybe implies it, but that's certainly not the point. Yeah. If that was the point of the whole psalm, that we need grain, and you're going to do something to give us grain, then surely they could have drawn that out more expressly. But it's so hard for me as a human, I think, to both recognize, yes, we do need for all of this work to happen, all of creation to work together in this way with God in order for this basic need of mine to be filled. That is true. But it is not true that the only reason that stuff should happen is in order to meet my need.
That is so helpful. Yes. And I think it's there in a couple of ways. One is that the CEB has peoples you provide peoples with grain, but it's actually just there. And so there's a bigger, maybe there's a bigger there. The other is verse 12. Even the desert pastures drip with God's goodness, or with rich food. The hills are dressed up in pure joy. That reminds me of that image again from Job 38 of God making it rain on the desert where there are no people. Yes. So here, very clearly in verse 12, there is food being provided in places where there are no people to eat it.
Yes.
And so it's not just about us. It is about the abundance of creation in which we also participate.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like the closest I come to having these little moments of feeling that proverbial bounty, because, like you, my life is so, I go to the grocery store to get my food. I'm so disconnected from the source. But sometimes in spring, spring in Atlanta is just this it is an embarrassment of flowers and pollen.
Yes, yes.
And the smell of flowers, and just everywhere you go. And I know many years I have sort of thought to myself, like, appreciated the beauty of it, and the sort of, this is also reveals how disconnected I am from nature in so many ways, but like, it's not necessary. Like,
Yes.
it's like, it feels like an like, wow, like it's not, it doesn't seem practical. How can the world be this beautiful when it's not and really the reality is there is a purpose, like that the bees go to the flowers and what, like, come on, Amy. But I'm not thinking about that. Like, it's just to think of creation in that way, that like, it's not all just like to give you a sandwich, Amy. Like,
Right.
it's, yeah, it's raining down in the valleys and the deserts where there is nobody else. And the valleys themselves are singing because it's so beautiful.
Yes.
And they're wearing the grain, and they're even wearing their flocks like a mink stole. Like, they are adorned with the bounty.
Which then brings me back to that idea at the beginning, if you translate the way that I was doing, that silence is praise for humans. So you begin with this sort of human being silently praising, and you end with what you were just talking about, the valleys and the meadowlands and the morning and the evening singing. And so it's this sort of rebalancing of whose voice matters, or something like that. Like, human beings are taking up too much of the praise element. We think it's about us. And so we need to quiet down a little bit and let those other voices sing.
I love that. It's making me think a little bit of Psalm 150, but almost an expansion of that, maybe, because in Psalm 150, it's sort of everything with breath, kol neshama, that praises. And here, I mean, it depends what we mean by breath, I guess, but yeah, it's really everything, but you have to get pretty quiet. Bobby, I think this is an example of me turning something that is not about humans into something that is about humans. But I'm going to try to put it as there's a thing I can learn here. Like, if I see myself as a sibling to creation in some way, what can I learn from it? And this line, you soften it with showers, you bless its growth. I just find so incredibly moving as I just came out of a meeting with my rabbi, and we were talking about what it is we're trying to do in prayer, and what, like, other than like, these are the prayers and you have to say them properly, like, what are you actually trying to do? And a lot of what we talked about was softening, like, create a space where people can soften into a receptivity or a quiet, or like to make possible some kind of growth that is not possible if you're not soft.
Yes.
And so then seeing the language here about God's relationship to creation, and that it's happening through water, I don't know. I just think there's a lot for me to think about in terms of what am I trying to do in prayer, in terms of how God is relating to the earth here.
I love that. I love that way of thinking about it, Amy. In the sort of like most wooden sense, what this is talking about in Israel, like, you have basically two seasons, right? You've got a dry season and then a rainy season. Yeah. And so we've just I think these are the rains at the very beginning of the rainy season. So we've come through the hard, dry season.
Sukkot is when, at least in modern liturgy, Sukkot is when the liturgy switches.
Oh, yeah.
Instead of we just switched in our calendar from rain, we pray for dew instead of rain, and then we switch back at Sukkot.
Yeah, so these are the sort of gentle rains that make it possible to till the soil and so on. And then there's more rain that's coming later, which maybe in some sense does more of the work, right? Like, this is not the rain that makes the plants grow. This is the rain that makes it possible for seeds to be planted and seeds to make their way in. And so, like, on the one hand, that's the natural image. But what I love about what you're doing with it is, like, what does this mean for us? Whether it's about prayer or whether it's about, I used to sometimes lead recreation events in Presbyterian conferences. I wasn't very great at it, but it was like, leading people in like energetic dancing and things like that. And that's the way I always thought of that, was like, other people are going to come along and say more profound things than like, here we are dancing to this song. But it was like people come in hardened, and you get them to relax and be silly and let down their guard, and then other people can plant. If you didn't do that, that wouldn't be possible. And sometimes we celebrate the planting things that obviously produce growth, but that other part, the rains at the beginning of the season, are every bit as necessary as the rains when the plants are growing.
Yeah.
I love that way of thinking about it.
Which again goes to, you are helpfully, reminding us that like we are supposed to think about water.
Yes.
But it draws out this other element of water really explicitly, that water is powerful, and water is the big rains, and water is the channels, and it is also the softener. It is the thing that softens before the rain can come.
Yes.
Like it is the thing that you need at every step in slightly different forms.
Yes.
And that's pretty miraculous.
Yeah, it is.
I want to be able to do all that stuff.
You could be a softener, Amy.
Oh, Bobby.
The word softener is not a great word. I guess fabric softener. I was thinking more like stool softener, and that's not really probably the image.
Yeah.
You look very sad. You look very disturbed.
It is true. It is true that there also is softening that sometimes has to happen there. That's true. I was going to say, is there anything else that you want to raise up? Because we're kind of getting to the point where we want to wrap up. But even as I was saying that, my eyes fell on the page to the hills are girded with joy. And that just the combination of like meadows being clothed with flocks. There's like flocks and grain and joy and song and I don't know, the sense of abundance and like really, truly an embarrassment of riches.
Yes.
Just really soaks this whole psalm.
So
I see why people read it at Thanksgiving.
I'm so glad you pulled us back to that, Amy. And even if you read verse 9 as you provide people with grain, which we've talked about, like that's the last place that it's about people. And then the whole end of the psalm is just about creation itself rejoicing in water, basically, in the abundance that is possible when water is available. All
right, friend. What's standing up for you from Psalm 65?
First of all, I just want to say this is such a lovely psalm about the fecundity of creation.
That's the word.
It's so beautiful, and the celebration that creation can do and should be allowed to do and that we should listen to. I will say that I read this psalm with the BibleWorm Collaborative, which, as you know, is that group that gets together on Zoom before we start doing our series, and we read through these texts and raise issues. And they were raising, I think really importantly so, what it means to read this psalm about water producing food abundantly for creation in a world in which water does not always function that way. Some places are overwatered, some places are underwatered, sea levels are rising. And it was that question has been churning around in my mind because this is a beautiful idyllic text. And I think we should let it be a beautiful and idyllic text. And also, the world in which we live is not beautiful and idyllic in this way right now. Which has led me, I think this is maybe partly why I got focused on this thing in the early part of this text about silence as praise and words of iniquity for which we need to be forgiven and the tumult of the nations that God needs to quiet. Because what it has led me to is all of this at the end of this psalm about the fecundity of the creation grows out of the beginning of that psalm, in which silence is praise, people come to the temple, God's dwelling place. May it be satisfying to us. May we be satisfied in your temple, which to me is saying something about human beings. In order for this idyllic world to be idyllic, we need to remember our place in it. And our place is being satisfied with what God has offered to us. And you and I have talked about this we talk about this all the time. The place that strikes me most is in our series a couple of years ago about economic justice, and this idea we kept coming back to, that God has provided enough if only we would be satisfied with enough. And this psalm leads me back a little bit there, so that the words of iniquity are these voices that say, enough is not enough. You've got to grow. You've got to consume more. You've got to be more. And this leads us to the exploitation of creation, which leads us to the misdistribution of water, which leads us to a non-idealized ending of this psalm. And so I think that's kind of what I'm sitting with here, is like, I want to rest in the idyllicness of it. And also I want to say, and there's a call here to us to think about who we listen to be quiet, to recognize the rejoicing of creation, to recognize that the words of iniquity that are all around us actually do require forgiveness, right? God has to forgive us. And we have to recognize that we need to be forgiven for listening to those words of iniquity and be forgiven. And then to be brought into the place of worship where we can be satisfied with enough. And then water can be distributed to the rest of creation, which can then rejoice. So I'm not sure this psalm is actually necessarily trying to get us to that conclusion, but the question about what does it mean to read this psalm in the 21st century, in this world in which water does not function like this, has led me to sort of an ethical conclusion about that. That's what I'm reading today.
I think that's so important. I think it's so important to raise that question, like the real, what does this mean for us now? I remember a few years ago, I can't even remember the context, but someone was pointing out to me the utter ridiculousness of the fact that companies claim now to buy bodies of water and bottle the water and sell it.
Yeah.
Like, what have we come to? That sources of water are owned by corporations.
Right.
And the water is sold to inhabitants of the earth.
Yes.
I don't know.
Yes. What about you, Amy, when you're reading this psalm? Where's it leading you?
I think something I am appreciating about this psalm, also sort of in contradistinction to how I often hear these things talked about now, but I'll talk about what I hear. What I hear now is often a lot of sort of distress or tension or argument between, at least in the Jewish world, a sense of Judaism that is oriented towards ritual and rules, and obviously we don't have a temple anymore, but that expression of Judaism and God as the leader of that Judaism, and people who are oriented towards the earth and its bounty and creation and the kind of godliness that they find interwoven into that in whatever way.
Yes.
And I feel like those two views of God, at least in the circles I run in, have become they're getting farther and farther apart from each other. Like they cannot coexist. Or at least there's such different crowds that are drawn to one or the other, you know? And so what I'm appreciating really is that this psalm starts in the temple and it ends in the pastures. And I feel like it offers this notion of God that is all of those things. And you cannot, so many places in the Hebrew Bible, it will tell us you cannot just go and do your worship thing and call it good.
Yes.
That's not what is being asked of you. And so we see in the prophets that, in terms of social justice, and it's not explicit, but I see it here, in the sense of if you can't appreciate the unfathomable beauty and intricacy with which the bounty of the world, like the fecundity of the world is possible, what are you doing? But I think it really is about, as you started us off, I think it really is about quieting our own heads, quieting the voices of capitalism and empire and government and manifest destiny as it lives in the world now is a different thing. But like the idea that we need to take over, we need to take over in order to prove our commitment to God.
That has really struck, like, you're striking a chord in me that's so fascinating, Amy, because I'm like, yes, talking about like advanced late stage capitalism or whatever. But, when we talk about Leviticus and Deuteronomy, it's exactly about this ritual life that is envisioned there is exactly about orienting yourself ethically in the world in ways that recognize the world's abundance and the sufficiency of what God has offered. And so in our communities, my community does this in its own way too, to separate the worship from the enoughness and the like, here's how we live in the world. So it comes out of us as well. I think I was sort of grappling after that point earlier, but you said it so beautifully. And the like gesture toward Amos about worship, and I often think about that as ethical living with other humans. But in Deuteronomy and Leviticus, as we'll see in a couple of weeks actually in Leviticus, it is exactly about ethical living with the creation. And you can't separate those two, but you're right. Our worshiping communities tend to want to separate them. Not just the corporations, but also the worshiping communities.
Yeah.
That started out as such a lovely image of an abundant world, and it ended up with...
But an abundant world is possible. It is possible. But it is also possible for us to break it.
It is.
We're working really hard to break it.
Yeah. That's exactly right.
Bobby, next week we have another psalm.
We do.
What a treat. Next week is Psalm 104. We'll think about animals and water and air.
All of the things together, but yes, human relationship to animals comes out in a really interesting way, at least in my mind, in that text.
I look forward to it, Bobby.
Me too.
I will see Summer Bobby next week.
Hey, all right. I'll see Summer Amy then too. It'll be great.
Sounds good. Take care.
You too. Bye.
Bye. Thanks for joining us for this week's episode of BibleWorm. If you've enjoyed this free podcast, we hope you'll help us keep it going by joining our Patreon for as little as $4 per month. You can also sign up for other goodies like early access, video lectures, weekly liturgies, and more. Visit patreon.com/BibleWorm podcast for details.
BibleWorm is produced and edited by Bobby Williamson. Our theme song is sung by Colin Bagby, and our theme music is The World at Large by Dano Songs. Many thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping make this podcast possible.
Next week, we will read another psalm that lifts up the grandeur of creation, Psalm 104. Until then, keep on digging.